The war's ended and the living hostages have been returned, and our people take a breath and the tightness in our hearts is eased, but this is still an age of trauma, uncertainty and existential risk, and we just simply cannot afford to lose the urgency. And I don't come to you tonight with easy answers, but as someone who has spent sleepless nights wrestling with the most difficult questions that the Jews have faced since the Shoah. I've always maintained my conviction that Israel must remain a democratic state, the nation state of the Jewish people, a beacon of democracy. But this year has brought me to tears more times than I care to admit. I have shared in the ongoing trauma of everyone in Israel and in the Jewish world since October the 7th. My faith in humanity was shaken to its core by the footage which I have been privy to of the pure evil carried out by Hamas, and will remain so forever because what has been seen cannot be unseen. I have felt inadequate when people ask me why their friends are silent about dead Jews, and I have no comforting answer to give. I've been anguished by the destruction and devastation in Gaza, and yes, by the number of civilian deaths. I have been sickened by the outrages of extremist settlers in the West Bank. And I felt bemused when people I respect deny the complexity of moral life or refuse to see truth because it brings discomfort to their preferred narrative. I do not know about you, but I am tired. But fatigue is a privilege and courage is a choice. We can carry on shuffling to the edge of a cliff in silence, or we can speak plainly, act bravely, and demand a better path for our people. Now is the time. Not when the crisis hits, not later, not contingent of waiting to see what happens, but now. In these moments, there can no longer be private concerns, because these are our public responsibility. Now, I've spent a lifetime in two disciplines that reward clarity over comfort: the building of global enterprises where numbers do not lie, and serving a Jewish public where values cannot be outsourced. I've learned that when the ground shifts beneath your feet, you don't recite old lines, you recalibrate and you act. But before we set out the journey we must travel, we must acknowledge the darkness that is descending upon us. Now, cliched the term might be, but I've always hugged and wrestled with Israel. I've never resented the contradictions in my emotional and ethnic connection to the nation state of the Jewish people, because I have never expected perfection from it. Sometimes Israel has scaled peaks of excellence. Other times it has struggled, like every democracy, to find the right path. Complicated perhaps in Israel's case because of its unique existential vulnerabilities. I can live with that struggle and accept that the real world necessitates moral compromises. But I cannot and will not accept deliberate, malevolent intent. Because when we see assaults upon Israel's democratic fabric, when we see the authorities encourage and permit extremist outrages in the West Bank, when we see a government that chooses to promote racists and bigots in their country and even in ours, these are not the moral choices that protect Israel and the Jewish people. These are willful and deliberate immoral choices that endanger Israel and the Jewish people, and we have a duty to say so. So I want to address four crises that converge to threaten Israel's future and the future of the Jewish people. First of all, the extinguishing of any hope of a peaceful settlement with the Palestinians. Second, an assault upon the democratic institutions that undermines Israel's founding values. Third, a failure of societal fairness that fractures the social contract and weakens social cohesion. And fourth, Israel's increasing isolation from the community of nations. First, we have a fragile ceasefire, not a peace. The war achieved military objectives but offered no new political horizon. It is striking that in just a few days, Donald Trump and Jared Kushner spoke more about peace than any Israeli minister has in years. Now we need to seize the opportunities to put wide-ranging, secure peace back on the agenda. The notion that this toxic conflict could be managed was false, obviously. Now, Hamas is degraded, but must be defeated. But Hamas's ideology is not an airstrip you can crater. It regenerates in prisons, in schools, and on screens, and in the political void we leave behind. Without a political horizon and a plan for post-conflict governance that is neither Hamas nor chaos, we risk tactical wins, but strategic stagnation. That means Israel must couple deterrence with a credible regional strategy that can be supported by committed Palestinian leaders, regional leaders, and the leaders of the international community. Security and peace are interconnected, not mutually exclusive. But throughout the Gaza campaign, extremists within Israel's government pushed an agenda of reoccupation and boasted of plans to put a final nail in the coffin of the two-state solution and the hope of a secure peace for all Israelis and Palestinians living between the river and the sea. The Torah teaches us, tzedek, tzedek tidof, justice, justice you will pursue, not vengeance, not illusions of total victory, but justice. It's not just a Jewish imperative, but the bedrock of Israel's legitimacy. Israel was founded in justice. I hope with all my heart that the Trump plan renews the impotence for peace and sidelines all extremists. Remember, in 1947, it was the Jews who accepted the concept of two states for two peoples contained in UN Resolution 181. Now today we have legitimate concerns about a credible path forward, threats to Israel's security, and the bitter memory of violent rejections of previous efforts. But Israel's legitimacy derives from the two-state concept of that UN resolution. Rejecting any concept of Palestinian statehood at any point threatens Israel's legitimacy. We therefore need steps that make two states more likely, not steps that make it impossible. If, however, the maximalist goal of annexation takes hold, then Israel's status as a Jewish and democratic state will be finished, and that will be a calamity. Second, the assault upon Israel, or the liberal democratic foundations of Israel. Israel's lack of constitutional safeguards created a vulnerability, which was offset by the liberal democratic values of its declaration of independence, by an independent judiciary, by a non-politicized defense and intelligence sector. The judicial coup started in January 2023 continues now, and it seeks to remove these democratic guardrails. Why? Why? So that an unprincipled extremist minority can gaslight an entire nation into its maximalist agenda. Now, there's an election coming up in Israel in the coming year. And know this, that if a government resembling the current coalition is returned to power, the greatest project of the Jewish people, the modern state of Israel, is over. Know this. Societal fairness. Societies that don't deliver fairness to all their citizens are weaker, and Israel cannot afford to be weak. Coalition deals that entrench unequal civic rights and responsibilities, dissolve trust. When access to quality healthcare, education, and jobs vary depending on where you live, unfairness of opportunity is entrenched. When lawlessness ravages the homes and towns of the Arab Palestinian community, 20% of Israel's citizens, and the state is impotent and unwilling to protect them, it is a failure for the entire society. In a mature liberal democracy, the equal votes of Israel's Arab citizens cannot be treated as unequal when it comes to full participation, not just in the Knesset, but in government. That will require all opposition parties, both Arab and Zionist, to stop playing by rules imposed by those who they are trying to defeat, and to stop clinging to political tactics that have failed and that stack the odds against you before a single vote has even been cast. And fourth, we confront the worsening reality of Israel's isolation. The end of fighting will ameliorate it, in the short term. But in the long term, as the devastation in Gaza becomes clearer, the portents are not good. And those who wish to divide Israel from its allies are being aided and abetted by the extremists who pollute this Israeli government. The seeds of isolation were planted many years ago by the enemies of Israel and the Jewish people, but they are now sprouting uncontrollably. Antipathy to Israel's government direction of travel is now mainstream, and the numbers tell a very stark story. And they keep me awake at night because of what they mean for the future of the Jewish people. I go to sleep with fear as my companion and awake with panic by my side. U.S. favorability towards Israel has fallen to 57%, the lowest in 2 decades. Amongst young adults, it's catastrophic, from 64% favorable in 2023 to 38% in early 2024. God alone knows where it is now. Support for Israel has declined in the United Kingdom and in the core European countries. In the UK, sympathy for Palestinians is 2.5 times greater than for Israelis. Across Europe, net favorability ratings have plummeted. For example, France, Spain, Italy, minus 45%, minus 55%, minus 52%, respectively. Yet, support for the two-state solution remains well above 50% across the Western democracies, including the United States. An August 2025 poll shows 58% of Americans support UN recognition for Palestine. And the political divide is very interesting. 78% Democrats supported, not unsurprising, versus 41% Republicans. But this is stark. In 2024, only 26% Republicans were in favor of Palestinian statehood. The direction of travel is quite obvious. So it is no surprise to see the cascade of international recognition of Palestinian statehood. Spain, Ireland, Norway, Slovenia, more recently and more significantly the United Kingdom, Israel's historic ally, France, Australia, Canada. Now these are not symbolic gestures, but are strategic realignments. The import-export licensing, legal exposure, corporate risk assessment, cultural, academic and sporting boycotts are multiplying openly and by stealth. And just look at the treatment of Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters in England a few days ago. But they are now being surpassed by financial and technical distancing. Politicians see the zeitgeist amongst their electorates. Sanctions become an easy option, but will be tragic for both Israelis and Palestinians. Isolation is not just an Israeli challenge, but a challenge for world Jewry. It makes Jews vulnerable within their countries. Recent JPO polling for British Jews reveal that 74% now describe Israel's situation as bad or very bad. In the United States, 1/3 of liberal Jews now believe US support for Israel's government is excessive. Meanwhile, anti-Semitic incidents have soared to record levels, bringing murder to Jewish communities in Colorado, in Washington, D.C., and last month in Manchester. 83% of Jewish students have experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism on campuses since October the 7th. Our young people are facing a hostile environment. If they do not see their own values reflected by our leaders, many may opt out altogether from the Zionist and Jewish enterprise that has sustained us through the millennia. And then we are all done. Now is the time. This anti-Semitic tsunami obviously must be pushed back, but so too must the current assault on our values by the government of Israel, because that too will be fatal to Jewish future. But who are we? Who are we? Are we just a minority of fringe outliers, standing up against extreme trends from all directions and without the numbers to make a difference? No, we are no minority, we are a majority. The date of courtesy of Milad tells us that. Our community in the United Kingdom is deeply connected to Israel, but the JPR polls tell us that 80% view Prime Minister Netanyahu unfavorably. But we are mostly silent, and it is our silence that makes us endangered. We are not marginal, And it's time we stopped allowing ourselves to be hoodwinked into believing that we are. We have agency, and it's time that we used it. So we built the London Initiative not to hold another conference, not to issue another statement, but to catalyze unprecedented partnership between like-minded Israelis, world Jewry, and democratic allies. Between people who share the London Initiative's commitment to what we call the triangle. 3 interconnected propositions: mature liberal democracy, societal fairness, and secure peace. This triangle is not a luxury package for better times. It is our operating system today. But this partnership requires partners willing to move beyond private hand-wringing to public leadership. So therefore, I make 4 urgent calls to action. First, end the institutional silence. End the institutional silence. Every major Jewish organization around the world needs to publicly articulate its commitment to the values of Israel's Declaration of Independence. This is not a criticism of Israel, it's an affirmation of Zionism in its purest form. And to our communal leaders, presidents of federations, chairs of boards, chief executives of legacy organizations, I say this with the urgency that the moment demands. Your silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. You were not elected or appointed to manage decline, but to lead. When 51% of British Jews say that Israel's conduct clashes with their Jewish values, and young American Jews are questioning their relationship with Israel, this is not a PR problem. It is a values crisis. And values crisis calls for moral leadership. We are joined this evening by the leadership of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and you have put your head above the parapet on humanitarian aid and the Israel government's invitation to the British extremist Tommy Robinson. Kol hakavod, be'emet kol hakavod. But we need more of these sorts of interventions by every legacy organization, every British institutional organization around the world. They can no longer be the exception to the rule. Second, oppose annexation unequivocally. President Trump said in September, I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. I will not allow it, it's not going to happen. Good. I hopefully believed it at the time, and he will continue to believe it. Yet for the extremists who have propped up Netanyahu's government, annexation is the goal. Everything they have done, still do, plan to do, the judicial coup, settlement expansion, curtailment of funds to the PA, the stoking of settler violence, is to create a set of facts on the ground to make annexation inevitable. Annexation is not a pro-Israel policy. It is an anti-Zionist policy. It's an anti-Zionist policy because it would endanger the Jewish state. And we should not outsource our opposition to it to Donald Trump. Jewish leaders in the diaspora and in Israel have to harness the will of the Jewish people against it clearly, loudly, emphatically. Third, invest in mature liberal democracy, societal fairness, secure peace. Recognize that they cannot be isolated from each other. Support multilateral diplomacy. Fund Israeli organizations defending democratic institutions. Support initiatives expanding civic equality. And back those keeping the peace horizon alive. Israelis fighting for democracy, for fairness, for peace are asking for our support. Please support them. And speak to your communities, finally, with honesty and courage. Our communities need leadership that acknowledges complexity, validates their concerns, and enables them to love Israel and critique its government simultaneously. I speak to you not as a skull, but as a penitent. I grew up in South Africa and regret that I did not engage against apartheid. Not because I was threatened, but because I felt I had no agency, and that was my failure. But when it comes to Israel, we have agency. We are not powerless. We are not without influence. But with agency comes enormous responsibility to speak when speaking is hard and difficult, to act when action is costly, to lead when leadership is so terribly lonely. And we stand now at a crossroads. Down one path lies continued institutional silence, drift, communal division, growing isolation, and the slow suffocation of the Israel-diaspora relationship. And down the other lies hard work of partnership, honest conversation, moral courage, strategic action, and the renewal of Zionism for a new generation. The promise of this moment is not that the world suddenly becomes simple, but that we can take a breath long enough together to produce a tikiyagad olah, a long, sustaining note that carries across divisions and carries through fear. The future of Israel and world Jewry and the Jewish people hang in the balance. And the balance tips with our choices, our voices, and our courage. Chazak, chazak v'nitchazek. Be strong, and let us strengthen one another. But above all, now is the time.